But before that, as I've mentioned earlier, in qualitative research, it is actually highly significant. Let me just check. Hindi ko masyadong. Anyway, it is highly significant, this one screen, okay. The role of the researcher in qualitative research. Let me just have a short activity for the group. This is only 1 minute, 10 seconds per question. We only have how many questions? So this is identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the researchers who are here with us today. So I can maybe share the link in our, I cannot see the, okay. Yeah, I think it's here. I can share the link in our chat box for the Zoom participants, and you could also, to our Facebook viewers, you could just click joinmyquiz.com and enter the code 978289. Okay. Just a short minute, just to have a cognitive, rest with all the terms that I have shared with you all this morning. Yeah. You can just check. I hope I have the right quiz this morning. So these are just looking into the strengths and weaknesses of the researcher. Okay. Don't worry. This is just a poll, and it doesn't reflect your whole self or your whole being as a researcher. So yeah. Okay, I think I don't know how many. Okay, so I think we have 15 now. I am not so familiar with how many participants we have right now. So maybe 2 more, and then we will start. Let's have 2 more participants, and then let's just, relax a bit. Okay, so I think I'll start just a short reflection. Oh, it's 27 now. Let's just start a few. This is only, good for a few minutes. Maybe I can stop sharing. Yeah. And then, okay. Just, let's wait for a few minutes. Maybe at 10:20 they are done. Okay. I think almost everyone is also done. One last 1 minute. There are still participants who are trying to answer. Okay. Well done. Thank you so much. I think I'll end the quiz. And let us just check. Okay, the questions. Okay, I think I can share again. Let me just share again my screen. Hmm. So far, all of our researchers, I hope that you could see my screen. Most of our researchers can exercise initiative. They can think critically about ideas. Okay, not taking things at face value. As a qualitative researcher, one of the things that we really need to practice is we go beyond what we can see, we go beyond what we can observe, and we go beyond the data that we have collected. Anyway, I will explain that later. And questioning the ideas of established scholars. Yes, as I've mentioned in the review, that yeah, sometimes it pays to also doubt some results, even most of the time, the methodology and how do they approach their research. But we will go there. Questioning established wisdom. Yeah, this is more on the philosophies and paradigms. So average as well. Well done. No pressure. Overviewing and distilling ideas. Okay. Establishing my own perspective. Okay, good. Having confidence in my own ideas. Average. Let's see. And arguing my case reasonably or cogently. Okay. And developing my own style. Okay. No problem with that. Let us now proceed with our discussion of the qualitative research method or your qualitative design. After actually identifying of course, your literature review now have actually sharpened your research questions, meaning you now understand what is involved in your variables. Now, the next phase or the next stage is actually you need to think about the means of answering them. So most of the time, simple tip or strategy to all our viewers and listeners this morning. I even share this with my advisees. Most of the time, once I develop or identified my objective, I will definitely also ask them to at least read 5 to 10 papers, but you identify clearly the variables or even the questions. And in that question, you identify how are you going to answer them. So this is now where we need to understand our approaches to inquiry. Last time, you have a comprehensive and informative discussion about qualitative inquiry. or what actually inquiry is. So in this particular approach, which is the qualitative research, your understanding of knowledge is actually significant. Even the ways or your point of view or worldview and your understanding of how knowledge is actually developed or produced, or how it is gained in a social science inquiry, particularly in educational research. So most of the time, there is this ongoing or existing, until now, I think they are still debating on the positivist perspective, and the interpretivist perspective. But generally, if you're going to look into your approach, you really need to think critically and identify where you stand, the foundation, I mean, of your perspectives. And then, of course, don't forget to tie up your purposes and your questions. And that is really important in qualitative research. So let's define qualitative research. Most of the time, the approaches are, defined in a complicated manner, but qualitative research is somewhat, when we look at it, it seems to be an uncomplicated approach. But along the way, as many people are using qualitative research, different standards have been put in place, and really it becomes more difficult in recent years. But this is actually really useful if we just first understand what do we really mean by qualitative research. Um, most This is just an advocate definition of different authors, but I will just use the definition. This is an evolving definition. So maybe this is the definition today. Actually, this is in 2011. We don't know how are they going to redefine again this term soon. So this is actually based on the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research, edited by Denzin and Lincoln. So they actually defined qualitative research as a situated activity. So I highlighted situated activity that locates the observer in the world, so meaning you as the researcher. Qualitative research consists of a set of interpretive material practices that make the world visible. So interpretive perspective. And these practices transform the world. That term is transform the world. So they turn the world into a series of representations. So that is why if you have read the book of Crotty, he highlighted symbolic interactionism in that particular book. They turn the world into a series of representations, which include field notes, interviews, conversations, photographs, recordings, and memos to the self. So at this level, with this definition, we could see that qualitative research actually involves interpretive, naturalistic approach to the world. So how we see the world as it is and how it is being represented. So as a qualitative researcher, we study the world in their natural setting. We don't modify, we don't, change conditions. We just, as researchers, we just attempt to make sense or, interpretive, make sense of the phenomena that is actually happening around us. So primarily, since it is interpretive, meaning in terms of the perception, the perceptive, or even the meaning that people associate to the world, what actually the researchers bring and what the participants bring to the study. So again, it is how we study the world in natural setting, and we try to interpret them. So for this, for our discussion today, I would like to focus on Creswell's definition. According to him, of course, some traditional approaches to qualitative research, as mentioned already by Denzel, it is like the interpretive naturalistic approach and meaning making. Actually, they are evident in many definitions. And also, I am just using two of the many. Don't get me wrong, you could search more and you could actually discover, and you can even create your own meaning if you want to, if you've been doing qualitative research for your whole life. So there is a strong orientation toward the impact of qualitative research in the recent definitions. If before it is only about interpreting, like the natural setting, what is actually happening, making meaning of phenomenon or of things, this time qualitative research is actually gearing towards the ability to transform the world. Yeah, so that is why I also love qualitative research, and of course mixed method design. Our working definition actually would like to emphasize on that transformation portion or element that is actually distinct from other research inquiry. So remember that qualitative research, as mentioned by Creswell, begins with assumptions and the use of interpretive or theoretical frameworks that informs the study of research problems addressing the meaning individuals or groups ascribe to a social or human problem. So qualitative researchers, definitely, if you're going to study the problem that is actually existing in an individual or a certain group, we need to use emerging qualitative approach to inquiry. So we need to be sensitive to the needs of our respondents or informants. And most of the time, our data analysis will be both inductive and deductive because we need to consider different phases or different factors that influence our participant or even the variables of our study. And of course, your final written report should include the voice of the participants. Last time, or I think my last research is actually a grounded theory study. And before you publish your paper, you usually ask or go or revisit and meet again your respondents. If what I have actually written, I even wrote a letter to the dean of the particular college where I conducted my study. My participants need to confirm if what I see in the data that I have collected with them and the report that I have written is actually what they truly wanted to tell me during the time that I collected the data. So this is somewhat significant that the voices of the participants actually should be present in the written output of a qualitative research. And of course, the reflexivity of the researcher. So as a researcher, you know, you are writing about how you view them, your perspectives. You bring actually yourself in the research and qualitative design. So your complex description and interpretation of the factors or of the variables of your study. And of course, if there is any call for change, so you write all about them in your paper. So, of course, this is only one of the usually most debated to approach in research, the qualitative and the quantitative approach. And of course, you also have now your mixed method approach. But let us look into writing the methodology, because the methodology is also included in my topic. Most of the time, people use this interchangeably with methods. But when we look at actually the methodology, this is an important section of your paper. And most of the time, we cannot publish our paper because of the way that we have written our methodology. So we really need to be careful in writing our methodology. So according to Given in his book, methodology actually includes the assumptions, the postulates, the rules, and the methods. And it serves as the blueprint or roadmap of your study. So your methodology should be open for analysis, for critique. Yeah. Yeah. Remember earlier, you can have a methodological arrangement or organization, replication, and repetition, and even adaptation. That is why if it is not a well-written methodology, how can other researchers validate your research? So you just need actually to write that. In terms of our methodology in qualitative research, there is actually now a common view that is rising in writing our methodology. Actually, as social researchers, we need to be eclectic, meaning we need to take a broad view and use a variety of methods. Not only a variety of methods, but really taking the best of the many methods that we know, not only following one traditional, methods or assumptions, but really following complementary insights. So generally, my dear colleagues, fellow researchers, the question now in writing our methodology is, how do we justify the selection of the methods and methodology? As I can remember, I have actually, as I was discussing the methods with my students last week, I have shared with them that in the handbook of qualitative research methods, there are thousands of methods. And that is why before I discuss to them the methods of research, I need to understand first their topic. I need to understand first their locale, their intended respondents, and their intended methods. Because we cannot fully share with them the methodology and the methods considering that we have lots of them. So let's look also into the specific characteristic of a qualitative research. Okay? Qualitative research actually, most of the time, it is concerned with the quality of information. And it uses qualitative methods, of course, to gain understanding. Usually, we will say that, it's non-numerical most of the time. That's how we view qualitative methods. And however, here are the key features as shared by MacDonald and Hidlam. So a qualitative research, actually, the main aim is to actually provide a complete, detailed description of what is observed. And its main purpose actually is to contextualize, interpret, and understand perspectives. And the researcher, we are the data gathering instrument. And of course, the data collection is unstructured. The output could be in the form of words, pictures, or objects, or the data that you will be collecting. The sample usually is a small number of non-representative cases, and the selected respondents are chosen based on their experience. And of course, if quantitative research is objective, we know that qualitative research is subjective, meaning the individual's interpretation is important, and the researcher tends to become subjectively immersed in the subject matter. And of course, we always anchored it in interpretive analysis. But before we proceed with the different designs, it is important that we are familiar with the 4 philosophical assumptions. Because when you do a qualitative study, when you undertake or when you decide that you want to do a qualitative study, there are different assumptions or issues that you really need to clarify. Most of the time, researchers write them in their methodology part. In the Philippines, we are not so fun, but we are starting to write explicitly these 4 philosophical assumptions. So these are actually these are your ontology. So ontology, which actually asks the researcher about how they view or what is the nature of reality for them. And their epistemology, what counts as a researcher, what counts for you as knowledge? How do you think knowledge are produced and how knowledge claims are justified? And then, of course, in social science research and qualitative study, axiology is also important. The role of values in your research. And of course, your methodology, the process of research. So you could actually read more about them. I think Creswell have written something about this, but I suggest Crotty is the best source, though I think it's 1998, but it will really give you a distinction of the 4 terms and why are they important. How do you view reality, being, and of course, how do you view knowledge? And then of course, what values are you going to incorporate? And of course, your methodology. What methods or what processes are you going to include in your paper? So yeah, just you need to fully define them as a researcher, because if you are going to do inductive and deductive reasoning, definitely your background or your assumptions will definitely influence how you interpret the meaning, how you interpret the data. That is why for qualitative researchers, we are actually trained how to analyze text. And what I mean of text is actually every other symbol, each narrative, or even transcripts that individuals develop or produce. So that is why these 4 philosophical assumptions are really important. So yeah, specifically for us teachers, we're dealing with human beings. Another thing is the lenses that you are going to incorporate in your study. So we have the empiricist, the interpretive. Most of the time, most of the design that I have actually included in my discussion are anchored on interpretive perspective or lens. But yeah, you could also do some deconstruction there, depending on the type of the design or model. So for instance, whether we are actually writing it or not, or whether we are aware of it or not, we always bring in our research our personal belief and philosophical assumptions. So most of the time, you deeply ingrain them in your research questions, research problems. That is why I don't prescribe topic to my students. I will give them options. I will anchor them with a criteria. For example, okay, you are your major, for example, is culture and arts. So as long as the topic that you will be selecting is anchored on your field of specialization, there's no problem with that, because there are certain beliefs instilled with them that is, that could help them in their analysis. So yeah, I don't usually prescribe topic. I just give them the limiting criteria as to until where or how um how many questions they need to formulate, and how can they answer them individually, what methods they need. But the difficulty with students actually in terms of using the four lenses of research or on research is sometimes our students are not aware that they are incorporating a certain assumption and belief. And the second is some students actually cannot decide whether they will incorporate this particular lens in their study. So let us look into, of course, the empiricist point of view is actually modeled on classical physical sciences. So more on, since experiences, more on investigation. So if you are using this lens, your reality is unitary, and it can only be understood by empirical analytic inquiry. And on the other hand, if you are using the interpretive lens on your design or on your qualitative research, it will be more on historical, literary, and existential studies. So most of the time, subjective understanding, and this is what we are using. Critical is, of course, more on judgments and power struggle. Deconstructive or deconstruction and post-structural is more on psychoanalytic, sociological understanding of things. So okay. May I just be excused for a water break for a while? Okay, so thank you for that. So definitely, if you are going to um, develop a qualitative design, you need first to fully understand where you are, what are your perspectives, and what actually is your background that you wanted to put or to bring into your research. And as a starting point, in a qualitative research design, you need to put considerable effort in thinking what or planning what methods do we propose to use and what methodology actually governs our choice and use of methods. And since this is a qualitative inquiry, you need also to ask yourself what theoretical perspective lies behind the methodology in question, and what epistemology informs your theoretical perspective. Excuse me. In qualitative research, most of the time, after asking these questions, after asking what method and what methodology, you need actually to justify them. That is where your theoretical perspective and epistemology comes in. Because most of the time, what we only see as researchers, what we observe is actually the method. How do we collect data? For example, you distribute a questionnaire, you conducted an interview, you employed focus group discussion. You can observe that. And once you have actually identified the methods, you could easily also associate them with a certain design or methodology that you are going to use. So for example, if I will be using participant observation as my method, most probably I am using ethnography as my methodology. And since it is ethnography, my theoretical perspective is anchored on symbolic interactionism, because it's, again, participant observation. That is my method. And then my methodology is actually ethnography. And yeah, anchored in symbolic interactionism. And what will be the epistemology that governs it? My view of knowledge is that each individual creates, or they can produce or create their own knowledge. So it is anchored on constructionism. So my epistemology is anchored on constructionism. So we could see participant observation, we could write about ethnography, but most of the time we don't write about symbolic interactionism and constructionism in our methodology section. But as a qualitative researcher, these are all significant. Though we don't usually write the theory, but if you have actually a well-written methodology section, definitely the reader will be able to identify what theoretical perspective and epistemology have actually informed your research. So, though constructionism is embodied in many theoretical perspectives. So there are lots of them. And even your symbolic interactionism will govern many methodology as well. Okay, so this is actually from Crotty, these questions that I have taken. So there are actually no single method to really there is no standard in really studying the ongoing human experience. That is why as a qualitative researcher, we usually deploy a wide range of methodology or actually interconnected methods. So the interconnected methods are usually, interpretive methods in general or in nature. So because we wanted to seek, or we wanted to find ways to really understand how human beings, how the worlds of experience have actually been studied. That is why I think Denzen and Lincoln proposed or presented the particular 5 phases that define a qualitative research process. So they have actually defined this. We could not actually search for a specific standard in terms of how you do it, how you conduct it, but we have different phases. So according to Jensen and Lincoln, the first phase of the qualitative research process is actually centered on the researcher. The second phase is on the theoretical paradigms and perspectives. The third is on the research strategies and design. And of course, the methods, research strategies or design, and then the methods of collecting and analyzing your data. And of course, the art, practices, and politics of interpretation and evaluation. So let us just take them briefly, but actually you could read more of them. And this is actually also a good reference for our qualitative researchers. Because in the present times, specifically right now in the way that we view qualitative research and qualitative design, we struggle to develop actually situational and transsituational ethics in particular. What do we mean by that? The researcher as a multicultural subject is actually the beginning or the foundation of your qualitative research. So all qualitative researchers are actually philosophers because you bring to your research your background, your understanding. So your phase one will begin with you as the researcher. What do you bring in your inquiry? You will talk about your personal history, even your views about yourself and others. And as I've mentioned earlier, your ethical and political issues. So that is why the researcher himself or herself is the beginning of the qualitative research process. You are the multicultural subject. And oftentimes, we overlook this phase as a researcher. We don't, I don't know with you, but we don't usually read them. But when I was fully immersed with Professor Kay Whitehead, she is one of my postgraduate professors, she really emphasized to us the importance of knowing your point of view, your perspective, your stand, and your lens before even selecting the design. Because definitely that is, and anchored on the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research by Denzen, indeed, the researcher is the foundation, the standpoint, the start of your inquiry. It is really helpful to highlight and position ourselves in our research study. So you need to fully understand who you are as a researcher and what you will bring in your paper, in your research. And then of course, in phase two, this is where now we as the researcher will bring inquiry certain theoretical paradigms and perspectives. This is where we actually anchored, or this is actually where now you provide direction for your study, because this is now where you present your ontology, as I've mentioned earlier, your epistemology, your axiology, and methodology. Your ontology, or how you view reality, your epistemology, how you know your reality, or what is your view of knowledge, your value, your value stance as a researcher or axiology, and then of course the procedures is actually presented in your phase two of the qualitative research. So these paradigms, these frameworks is actually provided by the researchers themselves. Of course, with appropriate, reviewing of literature, and of course, your own experiences as well. You address now in your phase two your interpretive frameworks and paradigms. And then of course, after that, in phase three, you will now be having your research strategies and design. So how do you now interpret and understand the processes? And of course, if you now understand your design, you will engage now in your methods of data collection and analysis. And of course, the last part, or the last phase in a qualitative research process, is the interpretation and evaluation of your collected data. And in your interpretation, actually, you will now involve your different levels of abstraction. That is why you have here the art, practices, and politics of interpretation and evaluation. So it is important to really understand the philosophical and interpretative framework that inform your qualitative study. So what are then the designs, no, that we could use in simplest term? How can we really share them to our students, and how can we really apply them? Ano po? I will just give a run through so that we will have a time for question and answer a little later. Just a run through of the characteristic of qualitative research. So of course, we have already defined qualitative research. So qualitative, we will now go with also the characteristic. How do we say that our study is actually a qualitative approach or a qualitative research? Of course, qualitative researchers collect data in the field, at the site, natural setting. It was in the definition. Researcher as the key instrument, they collect data themselves. The researchers collect data themselves. We examine documents, we observe behavior, we interview participants. We may also use instrument. And yes, we use instrument, but most of the time we use open-ended question, and we don't tend to rely on instruments developed by other researchers in a qualitative design or in a qualitative research. And then of course, multiple methods. So qualitative researchers, we gather multiple forms of data. So earlier we've mentioned about triangulation. So it is important to triangulate in our research. Sometimes we employ questionnaire, and then we interview, and then we observe. So what are now our sources of data? Of course, the result of the questionnaire, the interview transcripts, if it is a face-to-face one, or even a phone call, and then of course the observation notes. That is where you can triangulate your data, because you have a multiple methods that you have employed. And then of course, complex reasoning through inductive and deductive logic. I have mentioned this earlier, either bottom up from general to specific, or you wanted to work back and forth from the database to specific data collected. It is also context dependent. So you as the researcher, the starting point of the qualitative research, you are situated within a given context. For example, the reason that I can use participant observation in a group of, for example, teacher researchers or educational researchers is because I am an educational researcher myself, or I am a teacher myself. So we are always situated in a given context. Sometimes we observe also ethnic group, so we understand contextual features of this particular group. And then of course, it is an emergent design. What we mean by emergent is that we don't, along the way, our data is actually rich, and we could actually our questions may change depending on the collected data. The forms of data collection may be altered. So it is not actually structured. And even the individuals, our respondents or informants, and even the sites could also be changed. And then of course, reflexivity. We cannot overemphasize reflexivity. This is one of the key elements of qualitative research. Researchers position themselves in a qualitative research. We convey our background in our study. That is why more often some researchers will ask me, Madam Jan, is it possible or is it okay if I use I or the personal pronoun in my research? I will ask the question, what method are you using, or what design or what methodology are you using? Because if it is highly qualitative, yes, of course you may, because you always need to convey your background in your research. This include your experiences, this include your history, and this definitely need to inform, your background will definitely inform your study. And then of course, holistic account. In terms of holistic account, we try to develop a complex picture of the issue that we are studying. So it is holistic because we are not only bound by cause and effect relationship, but we actually go beyond. We describe the complex interaction of factors in our research. So this is not usually linear, it is iterative, sometimes cyclical, depending on the design that you will adhere to. So when do we use qualitative research then? So if your problem or issue needs an exploration, use qualitative research. Okay? Because if it means if you need an exploration, the variables cannot be easily measured, or you wanted to hear silenced voices like, you know, power plays, politics, and all other things. You could study that using qualitative method. We conduct qualitative research if we need a complex, detailed understanding of an issue. If we actually, one thing I have learned also from my previous mentors, if you really wanted to like empower people, empower your respondents, use qualitative research. And of course, if you wanted to emphasize power relationship, it is also important. You really would just wanted to examine and to explore what is happening. So I hope I can, you know, I think we still have time. Yeah. So let me just present to you some designs. These are only the common. We have lots of design in qualitative research. The first design that I will be sharing with you this morning is narrative research. So actually, narrative research has many forms, and they uses a variety of analysis or practices, and of course, you can use them in different social and humanities disciplines. So when we talk of narrative, it could be the phenomenon being studied. So for example, what is the narrative of illness? Like we're having COVID. So what is the, I mean, we're experiencing this pandemic. What is the narrative of an illness? Or you wanted also to look into the different method that is actually used in the study. So definitely as presented by Chase, Clandinin, and Pennigar, all of this group of researchers, it could be the procedure of analyzing stories, told stories. So, of course, as a method or as a design, it needs to begin with the experiences. And from that experiences, how was it expressed or how was it told? So you are going to look into the onto their narrative. So as emphasized by Clandinin, the focus of narrative inquiry or narrative research is not on valorizing individual experience, but it is more on the exploration. Again, narrative research is actually more on the exploration of the social, cultural, familial, linguistic, and institutional narratives. So that is why you ask individual experiences, but you constitute all of those aspects of his or her life. How was it expressed? How was it enacted? So, and it begins with experiences, of course, as I've mentioned earlier. So if you want to explore more on narrative inquiry, there are popular approaches and example of narrative inquiry. So a biographical study is a form of a narrative research or a narrative study. Again, biographical. So you are exploring your, for example, I want to explore my professional identity. So I will write a biographical study, but in the context of my profession, for example. Or Autoethnography is also an example of a narrative research. Again, this is the same auto and then ethnography, and you are writing or recording your own experiences. You are the researcher at the same time. You are the subject of your own study. Okay, so it is in autoethnography. It is just like you are exploring multiple layers of your own consciousness. So it is just we have lots of I think you can explore Ellis or Monsi for autoethnography. So I have not tried it. Maybe soon I will try this design. And of course, we also look into certain life history or oral history. So narrative, as long as it is based, this is actually narrative research is actually best for capturing detailed stories of life. So experiences of an individual. So if you wanted to study experiences of an individual, maybe this design is for you. So, or it could be one individual, or it could also be just small number, like 5 leaders who you wanted to uh, conduct the study with. So this is more about recording the stories and memoing. Okay, so I will give you here, if you want to explore this paper, because I know that I cannot discuss everything in one sitting. I've mentioned Clandinin earlier. So you could read actually her book, Engaging in Narrative Inquiry. Actually, in this book, she was able to articulate her intention to return to the question, what is that narrative inquiries do? So there are practical guides actually in how you can use detailed descriptions and examples of narrative inquiry in educational research in particular. And if not, you can also look at or read Riesman's book on narrative methods for the human sciences. So Catherine, on the other hand, she actually used cross-disciplinary exemplars alongside descriptions of 4 specific methods of narrative analysis: the thematic analysis, structural analysis, dialogic and performance analysis, and the visual analysis. So you could actually check that. We also have other writers of narrative inquiry. I was not able to write them in my PowerPoint, but if you could also search for the narratives in social science research by Barbara Jamwamska, or the narrative inquiry by Colette Daute. So yeah. The next one, I hope everyone is still okay out there. So I am not, I'll just run through this so that we will be having a Q&A. Another design that is famous under qualitative research, this qualitative research is actually phenomenology, or the phenomenological research. If narrative study actually is more on the stories of experiences of a single or of an individual, or it could also be several individuals, phenomenology describes the common meaning for several individuals of their lived experiences of a concept or phenomenon. So as a phenomenologist, you will focus, your focus on will be on describing what all the participants in your research have in common as they experience a certain phenomenon. For example, if you're going to the phenomenological study of what is actually happening during the COVID-19 pandemic, but just make sure that you will also be setting certain criteria, certain phenomenological stance as well. So your basic purpose as a phenomenological researcher is you wanted to reduce individual experiences with a phenomenon to uh, so that you will be able to identify or describe a universal essence of whatever an individual person is actually experiencing. So the basic purpose of phenomenology, that is the basic purpose as actually mentioned by Van Hamen. So there are also different philosophies that actually uh, is being used by phenomenological researchers. And most of the time, they emphasize on the intentionality of the consciousness. So again, this will talk about how you view reality. So different authors will give you different procedures for conducting phenomenological research. So others have actually developed a systematic approach. So if you could read Mustaka, uh, his paper was actually published in 1994. So it will be dependent on the phenomenon that you are interested to study. And um, it could also be, just the common uh, philosophical assumptions that you wanted to incorporate in an individual's reality. So it is actually highly dependent on the the phenomenon or what is actually happening in a certain group of individual. So though it provides a deep understanding of phenomenology, um, actually there are also certain knowledge or experiences that are valuable only for certain groups. That is why we don't usually use them, this method or this design, and because it definitely takes time. But if you wanted to explore more, as I've mentioned, you can read Mustaka's phenomenological research methods. So Clark Mustaka actually highly contributed in a description of the heuristic process of phenomenological analysis. So he actually gave practical instructions in the systematic interpretation of interview transcripts. So you could actually read his book, or you could also read Van Manen's Phenomenology of Practice, meaning giving methods in phenomenological research and writing. So you could actually also use Max Van Manen's book. This is where he describes the evolution of key phenomenological ideas. And he also actually presented different methods and discussions, if you could actually read these references. But most of the time, we use Van Manen as a source, if or as a model, if we are going to, like, for example, study lived experiences and all of that. Another design, I'm more so of the grounded theory researcher. So if narrative research focuses on individual stories and as they are told by the participants, and phenomenology actually emphasizes the common experiences for a number of individuals, meaning explaining a certain phenomenon, the grounded theory actually, its main intention is to move beyond description. What do grounded theorists do is they wanted to generate or discover a theory or a unified theoretical explanation for a particular process or an action. So definitely this is more of a theory development, this particular design. So we have different also types of grounded theory. So, but this is actually that is why it is called grounded, because you wanted to focus on the data provided by the participants of your research. So there are different characteristics of grounded theory. One of which is that it focuses on a process or an action that has distinct steps or phases that occur over time. So there is a certain explanation or maybe observation of a certain movement for several group or certain groups. So that actually there are two popular type of grounded theory. We have the systematic procedures and the constructivist approach. So I have actually used the constructivist grounded theory approach of Charmas to understand the conceptions and misconceptions of educational research in laboratory school. So I have conducted a certain study. So um, you involve identifying categories, codes, and codings, and systematic procedures. So yeah, you could just use them as an example, and we have different procedures for that. And of course, each design has its own challenges. And then of course, you can read, as I've mentioned, I have used uh, usually, basically, always use Kathy Charma's book on constructing grounded theory, and she actually explained very well, no, the reflections of different scholars who conducted grounded theory. And then of course you could also read Corbin and Strauss, Basics of Qualitative Research, Techniques and Procedures for Developing Grounded Theory. So they also enriched their book on grounded theory. So we have also lots of books. I think Clark, and they are also joining or participating or asking other researchers to join their research. Another famous or basic design that is commonly used in qualitative research is the ethnographic research. So if grounded theory wanted actually to develop a theory from examining many individuals sharing the same process or action or interaction, in ethnographic research, the study participants are not likely to be located in the same place. So definitely you are interested in shared patterns. If you are an ethnographic researcher, you wanted to focus on the entire culture sharing group. You describe and interpret the shared and learned patterns of values, behaviors, beliefs, and language of a culture sharing group. So again, there are different types of ethnographies as well. So you have your confessional ethnography, you have your life history, feminist ethnography, ethnographic novels, visual ethnography. Actually, the most popular is the realist ethnography and the critical ethnography. So yeah, and of course, let me just share with you what you can, if you can read more. Fetterman, this is David Fetterman, a discussion on the basic features of ethnography, and also you could also look for Walcott on the understanding of the nature of ethnography. So these are just examples that you could check if you want to use these models. And of course, the next one, I think this is the last design that I will be sharing with you. So this is not all encompassing. No, there are lots of design out there, but these are the most commonly used only by qualitative researchers. So the case study research. So this time, if the intent of ethnography is to determine how culture works, case study, you still wanted to study a certain group, but in this time, you wanted to have an in-depth understanding of a single case or explore an issue or problem using a specific illustration. So you are going to study cases in this one. So most of the time, you wanted to investigate a bounded system, or we call them your cases. So you can have multiple case study and all. So most of our case study, when I am doing my case, when I did my case study, actually, it's a multiple case study. My model is Yin, but you could also read Stake, The Art of Case Study Research. So actually, Stake offers a personable style, or yeah, from his experience using case study. I hope as I explore different qualitative research, I will also be able to create or develop my own style. And Yin actually give us a depth of what case study is. So yeah, I think that is for the design. And these are just, yeah, for the methods. As I've mentioned, how do you collect data? You have your questionnaire. So you have criteria. How do you use questionnaire? I will not focus on them. But if you have question, I may clarify. You have different format. Specifically, I'm talking about social surveys because we are talking about qualitative research. Because quantitative, they also have their questionnaire. They have their scale as well. But for qualitative research, we call them the social survey. So most of the time, it's also cross-sectional, but this is only used for small population at a single point in time. So most of the time it's about people's experiences again of a particular, particular phenomenon, particular event. So there are also guidelines in creating your qualitative questionnaire. Ano po? So if the scale needs to undergo validation and all of that, your qualitative questionnaire is the same. So you need to analyze also and validate them. So yeah, maybe you could also check. We have lots of computer assisted questionnaires nowadays, or the computer assisted qualitative data analysis as well, which are used for questionnaires, online questionnaires. Another method is the interview. And of course, this is one of the most popular and frequently used methods of gathering qualitative data. So what you do is oftentimes you do it face to face. Sometimes you do it via telephone. And of course, I would just like to emphasize this because since this is the most commonly used in qualitative research, sometimes we overlook that conducting interview is actually an interpersonal process. And interviews are not actually neutral in social spaces. So definitely we bring the way that we conduct ourselves, our values, how do we respect the people that we are interviewing, and how do we maintain appropriate boundaries. So that is just some of the issues some considerations of the interview. So yeah, because what you are looking for is perceptions, most of the time attitudes. So the interview could either be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. So from the term itself, if it is structured, there are specific questions, specific criteria. Semi-structured, most commonly used because it follows a framework. And of course, if it is unstructured, no predetermined pattern. So for example, you just throw one question and then another question and all of that. But these interviews are actually we don't usually standardize them because you have your own, or a certain researcher have their own criteria on what they would like to get from their respondents or from their interviewees. And of course, another method is the discussion group. We are so familiar with this, we call them focus group as well. So discussion groups, also known as focus group discussion. So they have been widely used actually to test policies. And most of the time, they consist of 6 to 12 individuals. So to get a specific groups or people's views. So you can apply this particular method if you need a rich in-depth material from a number of people belonging to the same group. So, and if it is focus group, most of the time people are more relaxed. It is also used in exploratory research. And the last method, not yet the last one, but second to the last, yeah, I think we're on time. I will still be having time for Q&A. Workshops. Workshops is also used as a method. So these are group-based method of research in which the emphasis is activity-based and interactive working. So the focus actually is everyone participating and undertaking the work. So this technique is usually conducted to raise awareness, to capture views and information, and of course, to build consensus. Most of the time, we do workshop to build capacity, but in terms of research, that's the purpose of workshop for our research. Because most of the time, if we have workshop, we will ask for brainstorming or even model making. And these are sources of data. They are actually a rich source of data. Even role play, photography, drawing. So you could actually check the outputs or study the outputs during the workshop or even observe the process. And then, of course, you have your observation. You have your participant observation and participant observation. So it can consist actually of a mix of techniques. It could be informal interviews while they are actually sharing something. You are observing also their non-verbal cues. Direct observation, participation in the life of the group, collective discussions, analysis of personal documents and produced within the group, self-analysis, life histories, notes, diaries. So we have lots of material that the researcher could synthesize. So participant observation is usually undertaken over an extended period of time. So it could range from years to months. So if you it's up to you if you think that observation is necessary for your design, because definitely you need to keep an observation note for your observation, and you need to analyze your notes. Okay. Oh, there's still more. Specifically now, we are also using the visual techniques. This is actually an interesting and stimulating interactive approach to gather information. So most of the time, you use drawing, painting, video, photography, and hypermedia. And there are actually lots of paper or publication about this. So what are the types that you could consider? There are researchers who have actually conducted the cartoon test. So the participants were presented with a picture of a cartoon, and then they just ask them what they think. By the way, I may share with you, most of the time, if I may share with my fellow researchers here, most of the time when I am invited to speak, like in any level, like because most of my topic are actually on research, so I will always ask about their perceptions of research. Earlier, I asked you about your concepts of literature review. So this could be data. For me, these are actually data. And most of the time, I write something about them. And yeah, because there are groups of researchers as well. We always have this methodological conference, like we discuss methodologies. So most of the time, we are aware of the conferences wherein we share the results. But we also have lots of methodological conference out there. And we discuss the methods that we actually employ in our study. So sometimes we also have the completion technique. So you say something about a picture or a sentence, you complete the sentence. You also have the collage or concept boards. So, images, the use of images, mind mapping. I usually do mind mapping with my students, research, specifically research students, in their brainstorming. So there are different types of visual techniques that you could actually employ. Again, it will be dependent on your methodology, dependent on your question, and of course, dependent on your perspectives and assumptions as well. So I use in vivo to help me in cleansing and organizing my data if I use visual techniques. But I think there are still others like qualitative data packages that you could use depending on which is available. So I think this will be my last slide for today before I share the before we proceed with the question and answer portion. I will never I usually will not end my discussion without presenting ethical consideration. This is somewhat important in conducting your research. Specifically in qualitative research, we are faced with lots of ethical dilemmas, considering that your positionality will always be in question. Your expertise, your lens, your assumptions. So definitely always consider that though we are adhering to the qualitative research design, it is still a rigorous systematic approach. So we have different research ethics frameworks. In the Philippines, we have our research ethics board. In Bicol University, we have our university committee, research ethics committee, and I know that other universities have as well. And there are 6 key principles of actually ethical research in education or in any social science research. So research should be designed, reviewed, and undertaken to ensure integrity and quality. The next key principle is that research staff and subjects, because most of the time we will have research assistants, specifically if it is a qualitative research, because you will gather most of the time massive amount of textual data. So your research staff and subject must be informed fully about the purpose, the methods, and the intended possible uses of the research. And definitely, you have to clearly explain to them what their participation in the research entails, if there are any risks involved. So you always need to inform them. Of course, confidentiality, the concept of confidentiality, anonymity, of course, and then research participant must also participate voluntarily, and harm must be avoided. Remember that the researcher and the participants, or our participants in particular, are actually the center of our ethical practices. And the 6th one is that the independence of research must be clear, and any conflicts of interest or partiality must be explicit. So we need to be responsible researchers, and I think we could definitely achieve the output that, or the research products and outputs or knowledge that we aim to achieve. So I think I'll end my talk with research ethics, both for in doing your reviewing your literature and even identifying your research methods. So yeah, I think I can also share the references that I have used. So I think I have list for further research. Let me just But I think, yeah, I'll end it there. And if you have any question or clarification, you can just type it in our chat box. And maybe I can stop sharing, or I can also share. Okay.
Are you done, Mom?
Maybe I can also share to them the, I don't know. Yeah, maybe you could also check this for further reading. This is only for further reading. So you can check Creswell, Crotty, Denzen. I've mentioned them. And yeah, these are just for your references in doing your research project. However, in general, I would just like to encourage everyone that if you're going to do qualitative research, you just make sure that you are not just doing it for compliance. You are not just doing it because that's what other people tell you to do, but because you really wanted to explore and advance understanding. You really wanted to contribute to the body of knowledge. You even wanted to help in the improvement of practice or even informed policies. So just be mindful of that, because it is really taxing. And as you've mentioned, as some of you identified, rigorous, you will get tired. But definitely, if you really wanted what you're doing, and if you are really passionate about exploring certain concept and topic, yes, you may be tired, but you will just rest and you will always move forward. So there is still a lot of undiscovered designs and methods, and maybe you can be that researcher who will explore on that. So just continue and never stop researching. Thank you.